talk to Robert Hayden. He was in Pittsburg, Pennsylvania. He's a former advisor to Yugoslav Prime Minister Milan, and I asked him about the latest news that NATO admits that it mistakenly dropped bombs on ethnic Albanians and other issues involved in this conflict.
There are two things that surprised me. First, NATO immediately went into propaganda mode. General Clark immediately said that it was the Serbs who had dropped the bombs. Now, he's had to back off of that. NATO is now admitting that there were no Serb aircraft operating. It's interesting that General Clark himself was involved in what was clearly a propaganda move. That was not true. But look, this was a war that has long since lost sight of its goals. If you go back to what the President said this was about when he started this war, it was supposed to be about preventing a humanitarian catastrophe and stabilizing the Balkans and improving our relations with the Russians, among other things. And, of course, none of those things are true. It provoked a humanitarian catastrophe, which gets worse by the day. It is destabilizing the Balkans.
Let me stop you right there. It provoked the humanitarian catastrophe. I mean, didn't Slobodan Milosevic provoke the humanitarian catastrophe when he started killing people, burning their villages, and moving them out of their homes?
Yeah, let's be clear here. Slobodan Milosevic is a brutal thug, and he's a dictator, and there is no question about that, okay? And Milosevic was mounting a very brutal repression of what was a very brutal uprising by the Kosovo Liberation Army, and there were indeed bad things going on in Kosovo. But, you know, in terms of the humanitarian catastrophe, even apart, you know, one of the triggering events was a massacre of ethnic Albanians by Serbs in February in a place called Račak. NATO just killed twice as many ethnic Albanians in their move yesterday. NATO's airstrikes, apart from the tragedy for the Kosovo Albanians themselves, the civilian casualties alone among the Serbs are more in the first 3 weeks of NATO's airstrikes than all the casualties on both sides in Kosovo in the 3 months preceding NATO's airstrikes.
What do you want to happen here? Do you think that the United States needs to just simply pull out?
I think the United States should do, look, it's been said that war is the continuation of diplomacy by other means. It is the diplomacy that failed here, and it was the Clinton administration's diplomacy that failed. It was also the Clinton administration's military strategy that failed. Every day that this war goes on, not only do we increase the humanitarian catastrophe, we are destabilizing the Balkans, which is truly horrendous to contemplate, okay? We're getting farther and farther and farther away from any rational goal. And the consequences of this...
What I'm trying to get to is, what is the rational goal?
The rational goal is to partition Kosovo so that the Serbs get a little bit of Kosovo, the part that has their most important sites, which are as important to them as Jerusalem is to Jews, and the Albanians get the rest. You could do this very quickly. You could do this diplomatically. You would stop the war now. The Serbs have always said they would accept an international presence, but not a NATO presence. They won't accept occupation of their country. Make a really serious political, diplomatic initiative. Strike a diplomatic deal. That is what the Clinton administration has not done and never did. The stuff before the war began, the Clinton administration's charade of negotiations in France, those were a charade. There were no real negotiations because the Clinton administration wrote a plan taking into account solely the desires of ethnic Albanians, and mainly those of the most radical of them, the Kosovo Liberation Army, presented what was, you know, literally a fraud that pretended to not change borders, but actually by saying that Kosovo would still be Serbian or Yugoslav sovereign territory, but those governments, Serbian and Yugoslav governments, would have no authority of any kind to do anything of any kind whatsoever. That's a fraud.